People who work in industries that attract rabid enthusiasts, trains, coasters, pro sports, etc. What is the most ridiculous act of obsession you've witnessed? Train enthusiasts have been known to break into rail facilities and steal stuff off the more unique or rare equipment. It's a fairly regular occurrence, and often ruins it for the rest of us, as it'll put that piece of equipment out of circulation. When my autistic son, who was obsessed with trains, was 3 years old, an engineer gave him a train key. He carried it everywhere, even slept with it, for years. Worked at a water park. We had this couple that bought season tickets to the park every year. They were avid money collectors. Essentially what they did was they would rotate between our lazy rivers and our wave pool and just collect change that people dropped at the bottom of the pools. They were there practically every day during the summer. They were obsessed with collecting lost money at the bottom of the pool. They claim that they collect enough money to buy season tickets every year and food at the park, which means they've collected several $100s over the course of the summer. I can relate to this one. I once found $100 in small bills stuck to an intake filter in the lazy river of my local water park. I would always check that same spot every time I went back, but I never found that much again. Skydivers living in their cars. I've known multiple skydivers who choose to live out of their cars to be at the drop zone 24/7. These are not people who couldn't afford an apartment or couldn't commute, but they work at the DZ and choose to live in their cars, so they are there literally 100% of the time to either be jumping for $ or spending those Singapore dollars jumping. I get it. It's a great sport, but crap. Literally addicted to the experience. The term adrenaline junkie isn't a joke. Worked in fine dining in a city with a very large population of engineers and tech workers. Nothing against tech workers and engineers, but there are some odd ones in that cross-section of society. One of the few corners that was cut in the restaurant was our soups. They came in a bag from a factory in British Columbia, but we added stock, heated it up and garnished it with fancy croutons and such. The soups was never pushed by wait staff. It was just a menu item you'd expect at a restaurant of our size. We had a regular who was obsessed with our soups. He would come in multiple times a week and get steak and a soup. He was, depending on the waitress you asked, somewhere between Asperger's and full-blown autistic savant. But he tipped very generously and was by all accounts a lonely guy who got a lot of comfort from his medium rare filet mignon and his soup that came from a bag. One menu rollout we removed soups from the menu. As you might imagine, this customer was distraught. We saw this coming and ordered an extra bag of soup just for him. After all, he was a regular and a big tipper. Towards the end of his bag of soup, he started a personal crusade to get soups back on the menu. Handwritten letters to CEO, executive chef, board of directors and anyone else who would listen. He loudly complained to all of the managers of the restaurant, begging them to bring back the soups. I later learned the corporate Twitter had to block him. Dozens of Yelp reviews lamenting the loss of soups. Before he got trespassed from the restaurant, he went so far as to corner our sous chef in the parking lot and demand the recipe for his favorite soup. In the end, we told him, "Dude, these soups are from a bag. Just buy them yourself." Adding stock to a bag of soup takes no effort, and this guy was kind of scary, so we gave him all the information we had about the factory. I later learned he emailed the CEO, CFO and sales manager of the soup factory imploring them to re-win a contract to supply soup to our restaurant. In the end, he got too aggressive with a waitress and threw a bowl of our best attempt to recreate his favorite soup on her. A restraining order was filed and he never came back. Weird. David, wherever you are, I hope you found your perfect bowl of from a bag soup. I never thought I'd be so entertained by a story about a soup obsessed nut job. I had a astronomy phase on high school, did a lot of advanced courses and met some strange figures. There is always the aliens guy, the spacecamp guy, the completely moron guy, but in one of the courses there it was a clouds guy. You see, this guy was crazy about cloud formations. This was in a time where photographs weren't digital, and he always after class would try a hook to show his photos of clouds, and he had a lot of albums filled with clouds, cirrus, nimbus, stratus, IDK. What the guy liked so much, but he surely loved his clouds, never did any bad to no one, but I still don't understand his clouds obsession. I might share a bit of the same obsession. I don't really know much about clouds, but dear god do I have so many pictures of them on my FB and on my Google Photos. They're just so pretty and cool and fluffy, and you never ever see two that look the same in the light and the shadows and the colors they can catch at sunset and. Okay, obsessive cloud person out. I'm going to include this one since I haven't seen it with Disneyland. Some people are so rabid for the park that they've named and keep track of the stray cats on the property. I've seen a few employees cast members yelled at because they couldn't tell them the exact location of their favorite cat. In college, I worked on a photo essay about a haunted house that took its job very seriously. Actors wore no masks, only special effects makeup, and it was good. Had to create full characters, and yelling or saying boo was verboten. You had to create a full character and dialogue. It was a super scary house. The highest level actors who spooked people out front even carried real weapons. I acted there one night, wearing several layers of latex on my face and breaking blood capsules in my mouth for added effect, and it was one of the most fun nights of my life. The house attracted a lot of D&D gaming nerd types, and some of these people took this incredibly seriously. Many of them never showered for the duration of the season, about 2 months, if not longer, so that you smelled them long before you heard or saw them in the house. It really did add to the scare factor. But one woman, who had a spot in a wooded trail between buildings, took it to the next level. All day during season, she would binge eat. She was tiny, but she would eat these massive meals all day. Then, when hiding in the bushes, she'd stuff blood capsules into her mouth to make herself throw up massive, bloody puddles. It was horrifying. I worked at a county park where panning for gold is allowed and very common. It's an interesting aspect as gold is not associated with the area at all. With that being said, gold panners are some of the weirdest people I've ever met in my life. The rules for panning state you aren't allowed to alter any part of the creek to pan, but they constantly build these little rock dams to catch the flour gold easier. Holy crap, do they get angry when you knock these dams down because, you know, it's technically illegal to alter the creek. I've been chewed out hard multiple times for fixing the creek. This being said, not all gold panners act like this. Many of them are very nice and love to chat about their hobby, but some really tip the scale on the weird side. Worked in public education at a zoo. Every zoo gets some crazies who think of the animals as their pets. One guest, oh we'll call her now, loved our great apes and jaguars. When our much loved bonobo died, all the staff were sad. He was old and had passed of heart failure, and then I realized that N was probably coming in that day as I hadn't seen her the day before. I grabbed my boss, and the next hour was radio calls around the zoo determining who had to be the one to tell N. I threatened to quit if it fell on me. It was determined the primate supervisor had to tell N as the supervisor had been the one to discover the death that morning. When N arrived at the main entrance, the supervisor was called, and several security people stationed themselves by the bonobo exhibit. When N got the news, she cried a bit and went home to mourn. We were relieved, and then N showed up the next day screaming at staff that we didn't even attempt CPR on a bonobo whose end we had been expecting for months. Then she started grabbing guests and telling them how terrible the zoo staff were. Police were called. Within a couple of weeks there was a restraining order in place, and N is still not allowed on the property more than a decade later. I wish that was the only restraining order against a guest in my time there, but it sadly was not. Used to be a professional musician. Did a tour with a band called Bring Me the Horizon. Girls would line up outside of their bus every single night to catch a glimpse of their singer, Ollie. One night, some girl who was my age 14 saw me play in a separate band entirely and approached me. This wasn't uncommon, but the first thing she asked was, "Have you ever shaken Ollie's hand?" I said that I had. She then asked if she could kiss my hand. It was insane. For the record, I vehemently declined her request. This comment is giving me cringy flashbacks to when I was obsessed with BMTH as an angsty preteen. I probably did something similarly cringy and awful that I've repressed, lol. Historical reenactors are in an arms race over who can make themselves the most miserable in a weekend because it makes the hobby authentic. I think the most extreme situation I heard of was Civil War reenactors intentionally soiling their uniforms and rubbing spoiled meat on themselves so when they got shot they would smell like rotting corpses. They should use live rounds. Then they'll be the true winner of most miserable. Used to work at a Subway when Jared was at the height of his pitchman fame, and we had an overweight woman who came there breakfast, lunch and dinner every day without fail. She would pitch us on the idea of a Bride of Jared commercial that parodied Bride of Frankenstein, like we sandwich artists had any say in the company's marketing. People obsessed with resort activity directors. So let me explain. I used to work at a resort that hired a guide to run all of the guest activities. Things like lawn games, bingo, occasional night shows when we didn't have a headliner, stuff like that. Apparently he was very popular because we had people move their timeshares or buy new ones on our property just because he was here. At one point he was considering moving and we got calls for weeks asking if he's still there and where he's going. They'd get really angry at times. Crap, this is some proper niche stuff. I work for a large transit system. There have been several obsessed people who have actually taken trains into service. Not to mention they get themselves uniforms. The PD takes that stuff very seriously. Aviation seems to attract some really weird people. Most of the stuff is innocent, such as keeping a logbook of all the flights they've been on or sitting by an airport fence all day with a scanner listening to ATC and photographing the planes. The obsession starts getting a bit much though when someone comes up to me while I'm in my pilot uniform in the airport and wants to discuss an airline's business class amenities or starts asking real loaded questions about an air crash investigations episode they saw. Rarely though we'll get the expert private pilot or someone that took a few flight lessons 20 years ago that like to stick their head in the cockpit after a flight and give their expert analysis about what we could have done better on the flight. This is like the Yahoo yelling golf tips to the pro walking to the 18th at the Masters. For some reason these people think that being hypercritical to the pilots is going to impress us. It doesn't. It actually makes me want to talk to passengers even less about the job. Semi-related story. I worked at Nickelodeon Universe at the Mall of America for 4 years throughout college. One of our regulars was a middle-aged black guy who, no joke, always wore a purple suit, one white bedazzled glove, and carried a cane. For looks, didn't seem like he used it to walk. I literally never heard him say a word the entire time I worked there. Not sure if he was mute deaf. And he would come in at least once a week. He would ride every single ride by himself, even the little kiddie rides, once and then leave. Never learned his name or anything about him, but every time he saw me he'd run over and give me a fist bump. He was a super pleasant guy, just very eccentric. It's been about 4 years since I worked there, not sure if he's still coming in or not. Kind of sounds like a dude I used to see when I worked in the Volusia Mall in Daytona Beach. This middle-aged black guy would come in wearing a different pimp suit every single time. One day all purple, one day all lime green, etc. I would love to know what his car looked like. Military checking in. People get really, weirdly enthusiastic sometimes. I once had a drunk dude on the lit try to offer me a wad of $100 bills. I don't know if I would classify it as rabid enthusiasm, but the thank you for your service got to be a bit much at times. Freight train engineer here. I've met some pretty obsessed people. We had this one guy who, on a regular basis, would follow our train over 100 miles and take videos of us at every crossing. He would spend 9 hours of his day again, on a regular basis, and take video after video of the same train going over a crossing. Who are you showing these videos to? Oh look Sandra, here's the train going over the crossing at mile 115.5. Oh but wait, here it is again going over the crossing at mile 110.8. Think you've lived, Sandra? Not until you've also seen the train going over the crossing at mile 94.3. I have many other stories. Used to work at Pizza Hut. At least once per week this guy came into our store at 2 orders of spaghetti with extra sauce. He would also do this at other locations, so he had Pizza Hut spaghetti probably 5-6 times a week. After eating he would go sit in his car and blankly stare into space for several hours before driving away. Not Pizza Hut, but I used to work for a local place. There was a guy who would always order his pizza half cooked. Every time he came to pick it up he would ask multiple times, making sure that it was half cooked only. He claimed that he wanted his wife to cook it the rest of the way at home. But once one of our employees saw him take a bite as he drove away. I work in video gaming. One of our customers was certain there was a conspiracy behind one of the PC versions of one of our games. Like we deliberately made it buggy because we disliked PC players and wanted everyone to switch to consoles. The truth was that he had a very old OS that didn't support the game. But he was convinced that there was a conspiracy to the point that he found me on Facebook and sent me a very troubling message with threats to both me and the company. Creepy AF. Some fishermen. Like I have a decent rod and reel because I like to fight the fish, but don't have top of the line gear by any means. I see guys all the time that are just decked out with all the pro gear and top of the line equipment and everything. Like at least 5 grand worth of gear that is not needed at all. I'll ask what they've caught, and they usually say nothing so far. Guess they don't wanna bite today. And usually the first few casts I catch something. You don't need the best gear in the world. The gear won't catch you the fish. Just learn their diets and what structure they like to live in. From there you'll be able to catch so many fish. I used to know a farmer who would insert the name of a railway station and its history into every conversation, no matter how slim the connection may be. His knowledge was impressive, but it got really annoying after a while. I worked at Toys R Us when Star Wars came back with the prequels. I watched 2 obese balding men argue over a cardboard cutout of Darth Maul. The one who lost went to our store manager and literally cried like a child over how we should have had 2 cutouts so he could have won. We had adults pushing little children down so they could get to action figures. Star Wars nerds are awful. I don't know what it is about Star Wars fans in particular. Red Letter Media has a few skits of grown men and women watching the trailer for like episode 7 and literally crying with joy like it's the second coming. The original trilogy was fun, the prequels were pretty badly written, and the sequels are committee written cash grabs. I just can't imagine why people are so obsessed. Scuba diver here. Background. I worked at a dive shop for 4 years in Tennessee, you know, the totally landlocked state, and still helped teach scuba classes at the local university. There were 2 groups of people that I noticed the most when it came to diving. The first were the people with plenty of money and usually plenty of time who were tired of the usual expensive activities, that is, golf, boating, fishing, hunting, etc. They would come in the shop and say they needed to get certified for their Fiji trip that just happened to be in like 5 days. Getting certified usually takes about a month. At least it does in Tennessee. Did I mention we were landlocked? So they would pay extra for private lessons and then buy all of the most expensive stuff. Not the best stuff, the most expensive. Literally, what's the most expensive BC regulator mask fin snorkel? I point to our most expensive item that I've maybe sold 1 of for the entire year. I'll take 2 of them, so they do all of this, then go on their trip, and then they completely drop off from the scuba diving grid. Like if you want to scuba dive in Tennessee, there's only so many dive shops you can go to. So if you all of a sudden stop diving, we're gonna notice. I never understood those people. The second group of people were the blue collar workers who somehow ended up in a scuba class just to find out that they love IT. So, they would spend paycheck after paycheck on diving. Now, don't get me wrong. These were my kind of people. After all, diving is freaking awesome, but it's also stupid expensive. Why do you think I worked at a dive shop? But these people took it to another level. They would come up with all kinds of payment plans to try to buy stuff as soon as they could. And my boss was a notorious bargainer. So we ended up with all sorts of weird stuff like a new business sign out front, new windows when one of our broke, a brand new roof, all from him bartering scuba stuff. And these people would dive in anything. The best Tennessee diving you're gonna find are quarries, next to lakes where you have to be a little brave to dive. Lastly, there are rivers. You just have to be plain stupid to dive in these rivers. Zero visibility, overhead boat traffic, ripping current, don't know what you're gonna get swept into, or what's gonna get swept into you, etc. And they would dive all of it. Most of these people have never even dove in the ocean. We always joked that if it rained enough these people would be standing in the puddle in their backyard with a yardstick to see if they could dive in it. I've got tons of crazy stories from the dive shop days. Divers can be weird, man. I live in Memphis and the thought of someone diving in the mighty Mississippi is terrifying. If you ever go into a standard big box store in the USA, look for the Hot Wheels display in their toy section. It will be a disaster. It is not children who destroy these displays. It is grown but adult men. Collectors. They know when the sets release, and I have seen them literally hanging around at the store at 2 AM waiting for our GM team to bring the new displays out onto the floor. Apparently some of those little $1 cars can be worth like $60 to $70 right off the rack. If I hadn't experienced this firsthand, I'd say you were crazy. I told the guy to frick off since it wasn't officially set to be sold until 6 AM and it was only 5:30. Once I knew what he wanted and what it was worth, I looked for it and took both of them. Thanks for $130, dude. Music industry really has lots of obsessive people. Seen people that collect live shows recorded of every possible concert of an artist and search for better quality recordings of those concerts. Fish and Dead fans. I know a few like this. One has 50 plus terabytes of just Grateful Dead shows dating back to before his birth and something like $15K in mint original concert posters framed on his walls. I would try not to talk to him about music when we were in the work truck together for fear that he would never stop. I'm bus driver. Bus fans are real nutters. One day I was driving the oldest bus in the fleet of nearly 2,000 buses. It is a junker and should be retired. This kid gets on and started excitedly telling me how he was waiting for me to show up. He continues with the history of this bus, how it was transferred to my division after its original division retired all their Orion 7s. This kid knew more about the history of this bus than anyone should know. Kid actually knew when the last oil change was. I'm a pro athlete in an Olympic sport that is virtually unheard of in the US where I'm from, but wildly popular in Europe. One of my first international races was a relay, and I anchored, went last. I was caught by the leaders after my second of 3 laps, which meant I was pulled from the race, and I didn't get to finish and therefore my team didn't finish either. I was on the verge of tears. Being a rookie and feeling like this was the end of the world, I went into the finish zone and put my warm-ups on, and once the race finished a little later I went out to cool down. I was keeping my head down, not wanting to look at all the fans because I felt I had done so awful, and it was a really embarrassing thing to go by the crowd having essentially lost the race. I stopped at an American flag. Often people put country flags on the fence to show who they are rooting for, from some Russian fans who waved me over. Russians make up a huge fan base, so for them to also root for other athletes isn't unusual. Instead of passing something over the fence for me to autograph, they handed me a shot poured out of a flask. Well, I thought FK it, might as well start improving my day now. I threw back the shot with all the reckless abandon of someone who just sucked at their job in front of thousands of people. All the fans along the fence, not just the ones who handed me the shot but the hundreds along it, went nuts cheering and applauding and handing out more and more shots. To this day, I still haven't achieved that level of stardom in anything. TLDR, my drinking prowess saves relay face. That would have been an epic video to have. You may not have had the fanfare of making it to the top, but finishing in the middle is pretty dull. Finishing the way you did, that'd be a funny story of high point. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.